The piano is probably the most widely known and played of all musical instruments, and it's certainly the most versatile. It can hold its own against a full orchestra in sheer volume, as it does in that concerto by Grieg I was just playing. Or it can, at the will of the player, subdue itself to the most delicate whisper. Now, this instrument, which we tend to take for granted, is a comparative newcomer, about 250 years old, though there were, of course, keyboard instruments before it: harpsichords, clavichords, spinets, and virginals, or going still further back, the organ. But let's confine ourselves to those instruments which make their sounds through the orderly arrangement of strings of different lengths stretched across some kind of frame. The earliest of these goes back before the keyboard itself was invented, the harp. One of the harp's descendants was the psaltery. The psaltery was plucked either by the fingers or with a plectrum or quill. When the idea arose of controlling these sounds from a keyboard, the principle of plucking still persisted. The Elizabethan virginal used keys to operate the quills in just this way. And the spinet developed from this same basic idea. Pepys described the spinet as a triangle virginal because of its shape, and this shape is still preserved in the modern grand piano. But there was also this kind of upright spinet with perpendicular strings, called by the grand name of claviciterium, of which this is one of the rare surviving examples. But by far the most famous and brilliant of all this particular family of instruments was the harpsichord. The harpsichord owed much of its brilliance to the luxury of having 2 or even 3 keyboards, operating different types of quill and additional sets of strings. This all helped to add variety of expression, because it was still hardly possible to obtain light and shade through finger touch alone. That is why so much early keyboard music made amends by adding flourishes and ornaments to melody notes, because these added a further rhythmic quality that could be made expressive by the player, as in this little minuet by Purcell. There was, however, one keyboard instrument at that time which did have the power of finger expression. It can be traced back to the dulcimer, an instrument similar to the psaltery, but played with hammers instead of a plectrum. It was the clavichord. The clavichord's tone was small and intimate, far too small for any kind of public performance. But it did have the advantage of direct expression from the key. The player's finger could control not only the impact of the sound, but could even convey a kind of vibrato after the sound had started. So it seems that the piano came into being from a desire to combine the brilliance of the harpsichord with the more subtle, delicate expressiveness of the clavichord. And it's generally agreed that credit for the invention goes to an Italian, to Bartolomeo di Francesco Cristofori. In 1709 or thereabouts, he produced what he called a gravicembalo col piano e forte, a harpsichord with soft and loud, though in point of fact it wasn't really a harpsichord at all, because it used hammers instead of quills. And here is a model of the ingenious action which was Cristofori's invention. The secret of the action was called the escapement. When the key is depressed, the hammer is thrown free to strike the string and then to fall away, so that the sound can continue unhindered until the finger leaves the key, which causes a damper to stop the vibration. Of course, there have been many improvements to this action in the past 250 years, resulting in this delicately poised mechanism used in the piano I'm playing on today. But the principle remains the same. And most important, although the hammer in fact escapes, its speed is directly controlled from the speed of the player's finger on the key. The great success of the piano, then, lies in the range and carrying power of its tone, despite the fact that every note played upon it inevitably makes a diminuendo. But composers were inspired to find ways round this difficulty, as Chopin did so often when he appeared to propel his right-hand melodies with a more florid accompaniment in the left hand. The early piano had its teething troubles. When the great Johann Sebastian Bach was first shown one around about 1726, he found the action too heavy and the higher notes too weak. But then, towards the end of his life, when on a visit to Frederick the Great at Potsdam, he played on some later models made by a German called Silbermann, and he praised them highly, which is just as well, because there are many people who consider that Bach's keyboard music is the very foundation of the pianist's repertoire. Here's part of his chromatic fantasy. It's a piece that still opens many a piano recital today.
I think that sounds magnificent on the piano, though Bach himself never actually owned one. But at the time of his death in 1750, the new instrument was beginning to win universal favor. At first it kept to the triangular shape of the spinet and the harpsichord. But a German maker called Zumpe, living in London, had great success with a smaller, more compact model known as a square piano. Size was often a domestic problem, and this perhaps accounts for the development of the upright piano, which is still so popular today. The first public appearance of the piano in England seems to have been in the year 1767, and it soon appeared as a solo instrument too. One of Bach's sons, Johann Christian Bach, became well known as a pianist. By the time we reach 1795, we even read that the piano had replaced the harpsichord in the King's band. Its popularity was now established beyond doubt. Composers, on the other hand, were quite naturally guarded during this transition period. They had to look to their sales. At first, they specified the piano as an alternative instrument, until eventually works were announced as for the pianoforte without any apology or qualification. One of the first of these was Clementi, whose vast collection of studies, Gradus ad Parnassum, is still the despair of many young piano students today. 5-finger exercises going through all sorts of keys. And ones for the left hand, too. sorts, up and down, and diminished seventh too. And as one approaches a little closer to Parnassus, there are octaves. And broken octaves. Although Clementi was a great pioneer of piano technique, he was easily eclipsed as a composer by his great contemporaries, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. Clementi himself admitted being profoundly impressed by the expressiveness and the singing quality of Mozart's own playing. This ability of the piano to produce a real singing tone also inspired many of the subtleties of texture we find in Haydn's later sonatas. For example, the slow movement of number 49 in E-flat. In playing that music of Haydn, I made use of these pedals. They add enormously to the color and texture of piano writing and playing, and especially the right pedal. Its correct name is the damper pedal, because when depressed, it raises the dampers, these felt pads, from all the strings, so that the notes will continue to sound even after the fingers have left the keys. Also, the fact that all the strings are free to vibrate gives an additional resonance through overtones and sympathetic vibrations. And this has caused it to be known incorrectly as the loud pedal. It's the difference between this and this. The left pedal, the so-called soft pedal, can work by a variety of methods. One rather primitive device, found on some upright pianos, is to interpose a piece of cloth between the hammers and the strings, thus muffling the sound. But a better method was to move the action closer to the strings, thus lessening the impact of the hammers. But on most good grand pianos, the soft pedal moves the entire action sideways, so that the hammers strike only one or two of the three strings allotted to the upper notes. On some pianos, you'll notice a third middle pedal. With this, we can select certain notes to be held without affecting the rest of the dampers. But the third pedal is by no means universally found, and in any case there are very few passages where it can be used effectively. Beethoven, on the other hand, made the most daring use of the damper pedal, the right pedal. Though we have to bear in mind that his instrument had nothing like the sustaining power of a modern concert grand. Nevertheless, during his lifetime, the piano did grow tremendously in power. and he not only kept pace, but even anticipated its future developments. Some passages in his early sonatas could still conceivably have been played on the harpsichord. But his middle period works, like the famous Appassionata Sonata, would have been unthinkable on anything but the piano. The piano grew not only in power, but in range of notes. The keyboard was extended by gradual stages. And then from America there came the idea of the iron frame, which made for greater stability in tuning, greater tension of the strings, and hence for greater brilliance all round. And brilliance was perhaps the keynote of the 19th century's whole approach to the piano. Beethoven showed it himself from the very opening bars of his last piano concerto, the one we call The Emperor. There were the showers of octaves in the Schumann. The grand sonorities of Brahms. Liszt dazzled his audiences with trills and arpeggios, and many others fell under his spell, as Grieg did in parts of his concerto. But as well as brilliance and dramatic power, one of the piano's greatest assets remained its singing quality. Not merely the ability to play both soft and loud, but the power to yield every subtle gradation between these two extremes. Chopin, who died well over a century ago, understood this more than anyone. And he showed that drama and song could go together when he wrote the last of his 24 preludes. The fiery but still melodious